Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. The video that you're about to watch is in relation to the two trips that I took to China back in 2011 and 2016. In part 1, I'll talk about the trip that I did back in 2011, wherein I just did photography, but I didn't take any videos. And in part 2, I'll show my trip from 2016, where I did a lot of photography, but I also took several video clips using my Sony A7R camera, which unfortunately doesn't have stabilization, but the quality of the videos is actually pretty good, and it shows some pretty amazing places, so I think you'll enjoy this. So when you think of China, what do you think of? Well, first off, of course, it's a communist country, so you might think very strict and you have to be careful. But other than that, you're going to think Great Wall, because everybody knows about the Great Wall of China. You might have heard of the Forbidden City, and you might have even heard of the Terracotta Warriors, which were unearthed a few decades ago, which is pretty interesting. You might think of the Silk Road and the beautiful clothes that the people wear because you've watched a few movies. And if you're from Canada or the United States, for instance, you might think of Chinese food and how delicious the Chinese food is, which I enjoy as well here. Or you might even think about that student who stood in front of that tank in that famous recorded scene from several decades ago during a protest. Or you might have watched a few kung fu movies with Bruce Lee in them and think how cool that is. So let me tell you how the trip to China actually came to be. I was trying to think of a place that had amazing scenery, and I was thinking about Patagonia in Argentina, and I was starting to think about China. And so I started doing some research on the internet on all of the above. And of course, Argentina, I'd seen other photographers' photos from there. That looks obviously spectacular. But what else is there to do besides that, I wondered. Whereas in China, my list started to grow and grow because I was finding these what looked like amazing mountain formations and caves and ancient cities, and it just had a greater diversity of potential things to see. And so, as mentioned, my list just started to grow and grow, and the thought of going to China was a little scary because of what I thought could be a communist country and strict controlled rules and things like that. But I knew it'd be an adventure, and it was actually cheaper to go there than to Argentina, so I decided I was going to China. If I recall correctly, I think that my flight only cost somewhere around 650 Canadian dollars, which is pretty darn good compared to, I think it was going to be about 1,600 to get to the Patagonia area in Argentina, so that helped my decision as well. Both trips actually featured several amazing highlights, but also some challenges, and so I'll talk about both. In 2011, I left Vancouver and flew to the city of Hong Kong via Seoul, Korea. And in Hong Kong, I actually did couch surfing. Quite frankly, I'm not that crazy about couch surfing, but it was free, and it actually worked out fairly well. I stayed in the apartment in a high-rise, and the host was usually busy with work, but at one point she was able to meet up with me, and I got to see the amazing light show wherein the buildings are all lit up with different colors, and they have laser show and the whole thing. So that was pretty cool, even though I don't really care that much for big cities. It was something to see. From Hong Kong, I did the short jaunt to the border, and I have to admit that I was a little bit nervous about, are they going to even let me in? Because you have to have a fairly strict regimen listing where you're going to be staying and addresses and the whole lot. So it ended up not being a problem. And so once again I couch surfed in the rather large city of Shenzhen. And the host was really nice. He's also a good cook and he's into photography. So at one point we actually did a little road trip about 5 hours north to a place called the Kingshan Mountains, which are amazing karst formation rounded mountains, which I will show you some photos of. And it was early on that I learned that the beds in China are usually pretty hard and not very comfortable. After staying in Shenzhen for just a couple nights, the trip was really about to begin. And my first main destination for photography was the ancient city of Feng Huang. Fortunately, the guy that I couch surfed with in Shenzhen actually took me right to the train station, and he helped me to get a ticket to the next destination. And from getting to that destination, which I can't remember exactly where it was, I had to take a bus. And fortunately, I ran into, I think it was four students, and they all spoke reasonable English, and they helped me to get on the right bus and get to Feng Huang. I don't recall seeing any other tourists in Feng Huang, and I quickly realized that it was going to be a little bit difficult to even do such basic things like ordering food, because the menus weren't written out in English and Mandarin. They were just written in Mandarin. So you basically had to hope that they had photos and that you'd see something that looked interesting, because along with that, I don't recall any of the people, except for maybe the person that ran the hostel, speaking any English. So it was a rather challenging time, and I knew it was going to probably continue. And this is where it started to get really interesting and really cool, because Feng Huang is an ancient city. It looks like it's right out of some of the movies that you might see from China, where they have the kung fu going on, and half the city was basically the ancient city, where there is also a newer part, but I stayed right in the ancient city. And once you get into areas that aren't really popular with tourists, then you find that communication definitely can be an issue. And back in 2011, we didn't all have cell phones with Google Translate or translation apps, so it was definitely challenging. And for the rest of the trip, I stayed in hostels. Usually I had private rooms, occasionally not, but they were certainly nothing fancy. They were pretty basic. And I do remember in Feng Huang, the building actually smelled noticeably of a sewer system not being very good, so it wasn't the most pleasant odor, but the ancient town was pretty cool, as you'll see in the photos. After approximately 3 days in Feng Huang, I was looking forward to my next destination, because that's the spot that looked beyond spectacular, and it sure didn't disappoint. So I took a bus to one city, and from there I had to catch another bus to the small town of Wuling Yuan, which was near the national park of Zhangjiajie. And I recall catching a taxi, and it seemed to me that he was overcharging me by quite a bit. And so when I actually arrived to the hostel in Wuling Yuan, I immediately went in and talked to the person who ran the hostel, who did speak English. And she actually came outside and really started giving the taxi driver heck. I don't know what the heck they were arguing about. That they got into it pretty good. But in the end, she said I agreed to the price, so I had to pay the price. But it's not that it was some exorbitant amount. It was the difference between, it should have been maybe $20 and he charged more like $40. But again, you can kind of expect that kind of thing when you're in a foreigner, but fortunately it didn't happen too terribly often. More than likely you've never heard of Zhangjiajie National Park, so let me tell you a little bit about it. I'm sure you've heard of the movie and have seen the movie Avatar 1 and or 2. And in the movie there's these amazing floating mountains, and some of them have waterfalls flowing down from them. Well, those mountains were based on the scenery of Zhangjiajie, and the mountains in Zhangjiajie literally look just like the mountains in the movie, minus the part about them floating in the air and having the waterfalls. But other than that, it's the spitting image of the mountains from Zhangjiajie. Fortunately, there was a couple of German students who were in China studying Mandarin, and so I was able to team up with them to go to the park, because again, it was really hard finding people who spoke English, even though this was a touristy town. But it's not a well-known place outside of China, really, or maybe outside of Southeast Asia. Anyhow, I think that I got a 5-day pass. You can get different lengths of passes, which are cheaper if you get a longer pass. And so, as you're going to see from the photos, this place is magical, spectacular, and it lived up to everything that I had researched on the internet. And to this day, it's still in my definite top 5 of most amazing places that I've ever been to. And I did end up going back in 2016, partially because I wasn't actually very happy with the photos that I got in 2011, because I was, I think, just a couple years into doing photography, and so I was a little bit disappointed with my photos, to be quite honest with you. But anyhow, the experience of being there was just amazing. And as I'd learned, there's a few really cool spots that I missed in 2011 as well. So I was glad that I went back for many reasons.
请各位来宾不要再游到吸烟，果皮垃圾请扔入垃圾桶内，并且请不要摘采花木。谢谢您合作，欢迎再次乘坐安全舒适的黄石寨索道。
during the trip, I was actually learning about some other cool places on the fly that I didn't know about before I even left. And Wuling Yuan was one example, because once in the hostel, I learned about a place called Baofeng Lake, which is just a walk up the road from the hostel. And that was another beautiful spot. And you can do a boat tour on the lake, and there's one spot that you go by where a pretty Chinese woman comes out and starts singing. I'm not sure if it was live or recorded, but whatever, it was kind of cool. And she's in a beautiful silk robe kind of a dress, and that was really enjoyable. I'd recommend that if you're over there. And I also learned in the area was, can't remember the Chinese name, but it was Yellow Dragon Cave. Most things are something dragon. And that was just amazing. That was the first cave that I went to in China. And it was huge. And I have a few photos of the cave as well. And then I learned about another spot which was a little bit further away, but is basically touted as being the Grand Canyon of China. And then over the years I learned there's a couple other Grand Canyons of China, but this was one of them. And I did have a little bit of a problem getting to there. I think I went to one location, maybe it was the cave, and then from the cave I tried to get a taxi to the Grand Canyon, because they're both the same way. And I recall that the taxi driver is starting to catch on what would be a fair price. And I think I asked the person who ran the hostel, who did speak okay English, what would be fair prices for things, and so I was prepared to know what the right price should be. And once again, the taxi driver quoted me a pretty high price, and it was impossible to communicate with him. Basically, I just had some instructions telling somebody to take me to the Grand Canyon and how much is it. And after he told me the overly high price, I was a little ticked off that he's going so overboard on the price. So I was trying to call. I actually did have a cell phone. I bought a SIM card in Shenzhen. It's one of those older cell phones, obviously, but it wasn't working. And I learned that my SIM card didn't work outside of the cities for whatever reason. So I actually I showed him the phone number, and he called it, and he started talking to the person at the hostel, and once again they kind of squabbled a little bit, and somehow they agreed upon a price, which was still probably a little bit high, but they agreed upon it. And this guy took me to the Grand Canyon, but he certainly didn't seem to be happy about it. He's pretty grouchy after that, so I guess I did get a better price. But anyway, the Grand Canyon was nothing like the Grand Canyon in Arizona, but it was definitely worth seeing. A lot of walking. You have to go down a whole series of stairs down the side of a cliff, and then you walk along river level inside the canyon. So it was pretty beautiful, and there's some waterfalls. And I think that I was able to catch a bus back into Wuling Yuan at the end. But nowadays, they actually have this amazing glass bridge built right over the canyon. So you can walk over the canyon and look down through the glass, and that would be kind of interesting. They do a lot of those kinds of things in China, and I think they're becoming more popular, like even in British Columbia where I live. They have a glass bridge somewhere in the Rockies to see one of the glacier areas. But anyway, I highly recommend Wuling Yuan if you're ever going to visit China for any reason. From Zhangjiajie and Wuling Yuan, I think I took a flight to the city of Chengdu. And I think that was just for convenience sakes, because that was the best starting point to go to another amazing place called Jiuzhaigou. And so on this first trip, I think that I just basically stayed in Chengdu for maybe 2 days or so. And I didn't do, look, that's muddy. I didn't do a whole lot other than just explored the town a little bit. And I remember I went to a monastery that wasn't too far from the hostel. But this hostel was definitely one of my favorites. The staff were super friendly, spoke really good English, and they're really, really super helpful with writing down instructions for how to get to the next location. And I have to say, at all the places that I stayed, the staff were always friendly and usually spoke some to really good English. But the one in Chengdu was definitely the best for that. I have no idea whether the hostel in Chengdu is still open or not, but it was called the Mix Hostel, M-I-X. And not only did they speak really good English there, super friendly, but they also made some Western dishes. They had a in-house restaurant as well. Once again, the accommodations were really basic, not comfortable beds, all shared showers. But I also recall that this particular place was where I saw the most Western travelers. And of course, most of them were all backpackers and fairly young, but it was a good place. After getting my ticket at the bus terminal, it was off to Jiuzhaigou, which I'm sure, again, nobody's ever heard of, but it's literally like a paradise. And the trip to get to Jiuzhaigou was an all-day trip, and I recall going through one area where there had been a really big earthquake, and you could still see some of the devastation. The old highway, which was ruined, and buildings that were in shambles from the earthquake. And they have had another huge earthquake in that area right in the town of Jiuzhaigou ever since. After going through the area where the earthquakes were, which was not that mountainy, eventually comes to an area where the bus is kind of winding its way down into this beautiful valley, and very mountainous and green. And I think it was November, so it was actually a little bit chilly in this area. The temperatures can vary greatly in China. Obviously, it's a big country, so anyhow, we got to Jiuzhaigou, found my hostel not too bad. They spoke only a little bit of English. And then I went to the park, and it was just amazing. Basically, it's a series of different sized turquoise and different blue colored lakes, and they kind of one, and then there's waterfalls, and then another lake, and more little waterfalls or bigger waterfalls, and just a whole series of just amazingly colored lakes. And as mentioned, I was hoping to catch the fall colors, but I was a little bit too late. The good thing about that, however, was that there is not as many people as I would see the next trip. When I got there at perfect peak time, there was just scads of people. In order to see all of Jiuzhaigou, you definitely need, I'd say, 3 days, 3 full days. I think that is on day 2 in Jiuzhaigou, which, by the way, all these parks do have an entrance fee, and some of them are actually pretty hefty prices. I was surprised by that. But anyway, that's the way it goes. But on day 2, I was trying to squeeze out as many photos as I could before getting on one of the last buses. And I was near the main road where the buses go by, and the bus driver actually saw me and another young Chinese woman, and they're kind of basically going, "Come on, come on," in Chinese. I didn't understand, but he's doing this motion, so I knew he's trying to get me to hurry up and get on the bus. So anyway, I sit down, the other girl sits down right across from me, and then a couple minutes into the bus ride down to the entrance, which does take a while. You can't walk this park, it's huge. And in English she starts talking to me, and she goes, "Oh, can I see your photos?" So I hand her my camera, and she's looking at my photos, and it's a really nice young lady. And so we ended up talking more, and we were talking about going to another beautiful location that's not too far away, probably about an hour, I guess, called Huang Long. And so thankfully she helped to arrange a driver for myself, her, and another couple of people from Thailand who were also really nice people. And we went to Huang Long, which features what's called the five-colored lake. And this area is even higher up in the mountains, so you have to be prepared for all kinds of weather in China, including fairly cold, not quite freezing, but next to being freezing. And so our driver takes us to Huang Long, and I hung out with her. English name was Amy. And the place was just, again, out of a movie. And once again, it started up really high where the five-colored lake is, and then there's a series of just drops and more pools. It's like the ones that you see in Thailand in some photos. It's like if you didn't know better, you'd think that some master potter or something carved out these beautiful, amazing bowls where the water sits in them, but amazingly they're all natural. And so that was really cool. And we walked the whole way up and down, whereas we could have taken a tram up and down if we wanted, but anyhow, we squeezed out as much time out of that as we could too, and our driver wasn't too happy about it. And by the time we got back to Jiuzhaigou town, it was dark out, but another amazing place. And that's what I'm saying. I just keep finding, even to this day, more and more amazing places to visit in China. I would have liked to have teamed up with Amy, because she is going to another spectacular location after Jiuzhaigou, some even more large mountains, but unfortunately she had her set itinerary and I had mine, so it didn't work out. But it seemed like whenever I most needed it, I ran into somebody who spoke English who helped me with directions or buying a ticket. Or actually, going back to Zhangjiajie, there was a really nice young fella, I think it's the guy that was doing the bicycling. He came right down to the ticket office with me and helped me to make sure I got my ticket, and because of course you have to explain where you're going, and if you want a sleeper compartment or just a regular economy seat, etc., etc. So definitely met some nice people. I didn't end up seeing as much as I wanted in Jiuzhaigou. In fact, there's one entire section that I didn't visit on that trip, but I did on the next one, so stay tuned for that. After Jiuzhaigou, I caught the bus back to Chengdu, which I would visit again as well. And from Chengdu, I took a flight to a city called Guilin, which is now going more south, so it was much warmer. And in Guilin, I just hung out for a couple days and visited a park that had a couple temples. While in Guilin, I got instructions for taking a city bus to the outskirts of the town, where there is just a absolutely amazing cave. Probably to this day the most amazing cave that I've been in. Can't remember the name of it, but if I figure it out, I'll write it out in the video. But it featured the most amazing, huge stalactites and stalagmites that I'd ever seen, and to this day still. So if you get an opportunity to do that, definitely do it. And I kept learning about more caves. I went to one other cave, but by comparison it wasn't as good, and it was near Guilin as well. But there are other caves that you can visit in that area, but there's also other amazing caves that are accessible, and they have tours in China as well. And from there I floated down the famous Li River on a bamboo raft, and that was a good half a day affair, and it was just beautiful. Awesome mountains on both sides. And we went to a little town called Jingping, and then from Jingping, as part of the tour, we went to the town of Yangshuo. And while on the bus, they convinced most of us to do a small tour later on that featured going out into the countryside, which ended up being very nice. It was fairly inexpensive, so it was good. I definitely have fond memories of Yangshuo. It was, at the time, not anymore, but at the time it was a nice small town, and the hostel was, best as I recall, maybe my favorite place. I had my own room, and it was nice and big. I think I had my own shower, And so basically what I did in Yangshuo was that I rented a bike, kind of an old beater of a bike, but anyway, it's very cheap. And I rode out into the countryside, and I just explored and took photos, and it was a really nice, leisurely, relaxing, good time. I had also booked a tour to go see and photograph what was a rather famous individual, basically known as the cormorant fisherman. And a lot of professional photographers had been to this area just to photograph this guy. He looks like he's right out of a movie with a long Manchu beard, and he dresses up and he kind of is on this bamboo raft, and he comes into this area of the Lee River with a couple cormorant birds, which were in ancient times, maybe still now, I don't know, but in ancient times they were used to catch fish for the fishermen. They were trained to do that. And so I was looking forward to that, but for some reason the tour was canceled the night before. But that ended up maybe being a big blessing in disguise, because on the next trip to China in 2016, I went back to the same area and I booked a tour to go see the cormorant fishermen. And not only did I get some pretty cool photos, just 3 of us, but the guy, who was in his 70s, invited myself and the 2 people from Chile to visit his home after. And our tour guide told us that he'd never done this before. This was the first time he'd ever invited somebody to come visit his home. So that was really cool. And I actually do have a separate video that I made just of that experience, and I'll put a link below. So I'm not gonna post all the video from that, but I'll post a little bit of it. Oh, and I just remembered that I can actually say that I've been to Shangri-La. About an hour's bike ride away from Yangshuo is a tiny town that is called Shangri-La. But there's another Shangri-La in China that's actually more touristy, and from the photos I've seen, more beautiful as well. But yeah, it's kind of neat to say I've been to Shangri-La. After my time in Yangshuo was done, I believe that I went back to Guilin, and that I flew to another city called Kunming, and there was a place called the Stone Forest that I was hoping to see, but that didn't end up happening. But from Kunming I took a bus to Nanning because I wanted to see one of the most beautiful waterfalls on the planet. It's typically rated top 10, and it's called Detian Falls. And so I did a tour, and I actually did a homestay in an apartment there, which was really nice. Hard to find, but it was the most modern place that I stayed at. So anyway, I booked a tour, and I didn't really know what the tour involved, but I knew it was going to Detian Falls at the end. But the entire tour ended up being way more than I expected. It went through some more karst mountain areas, and there was a stop at one place that was really beautiful. It featured some pretty cool waterfalls and a cave system, and so that was all a bonus, and it's very reasonably priced. And then onto Detian Falls. Well, Detian Falls is beautiful, but it hadn't rained in a while, so it was a little bit sparse when it comes to the water, but it's still pretty nice. And Dai Tian waterfall is actually right on the border with Vietnam, and so if you're in Vietnam, you can visit the same waterfall, but from the other side of the border, obviously. So I think that's covering all the places that I went to and the highlights of my first trip to China. From there, once I got back to Nanning, I went back to Kunming, and I think it was from there that I caught a flight directly to Bangkok, Thailand. And remembering back, I must have taken some more video clips. And once in Bangkok, I think I was there for about 10 days and took a few photos, but maybe I'll see if I can dig out enough photos to make a vlog for that later. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video of a unique country that not a lot of travelers and photographers go to. If you did enjoy the video, please consider subscribing and giving it a thumbs up. That helps out my channel quite a bit. And until next time, take care everyone. Bye for now.